Today on ZZZ Made Easy, we're getting swept away by Velina. This video will cover the basics of Velina's main mechanics, how you can build her, and some teams you can go into. This game was made with footage from the creator beta server, sound effects are not enabled, and things are subject to change. Thank you Hoyoverse for the opportunity. Velina is an S-rank Wind Anomaly agent from the Rescale for External Strategy department. Velina is our first Wind agent to kick off Season 3. I will spend time going over how the Wind Anomaly functions since it's a core part of Velina's kit. Velina will utilize Wind Anomaly's Vortexes to create Cyclones that inflict off-field anomaly buildup and trigger blooms. I would classify Velina as an off-field anomaly DPS, similar to Bernice or Vivian. Velina is a fairly simple agent to play, but mechanically there is a lot going on thanks to the new Wind attribute. Before we go over new Wind-related mechanics, let's cover the first part of Velina's core passive. When Velina's initial energy regen stat exceeds 1.2, for every 0.1 points in excess, 1. Increase Velina's damage dealt by 0.12% up to a max of 35%. 2. Increase Velina's anomaly mastery by 0.5 points, up to a max of 84 AM. Velina wants to use her EX specials a lot, so she's building full energy regen. To get the max buffs, you're going to need to hit 2.88 initial energy regen. Unless you run an ERW engine, the minimum amount of energy you can hit is 2.16 ER. This will grant about 20% bonus damage in 48 AM. We'll cover exactly what you need to hit both of these ER values in the build section. Next up, Wind Anomaly introduces new mechanics vital to Velina's kit, so here's a brief rundown. When you fill the Wind Anomaly gauge, trigger Windswept to deal 1 instance of anomaly damage equal to 1250% attack. For the next 30 seconds, foes will enter the Windswept state. The first time a Windswept foe takes damage from a non-Wind attribute, they will become contaminated with said attribute. Windswept's white color is going to change when it's contaminated. Now during Windswept's 30-second duration, all direct wind damage and damage from the contaminated attribute will be increased by the Wind Anomaly trigger's Tempest coefficient. I was able to get clarification that for Velina, her Tempest coefficient is a 10% damage buff. I do not know if different Wind agents are going to have different damage buffs, but for now it's 10%. Important to note that this appears to be a separate damage multiplier, and it only affects direct damage. In other words, anomaly damage like Windswept will not be affected. The Wind attribute has other plans for anomalies. If you can apply a different anomaly on a Windswept foe, you would trigger Vortex instead of Disorder. Vortex deals 1 instance of anomaly damage, and triggering Vortex does not remove Windswept. When you trigger Vortex, it will forcibly contaminate Windswept into whatever attribute you apply. Normally, you cannot change the contaminated attribute once it's set. Vortex is the one exception. Now, unlike Disorder, Vortex has different base damage multipliers for every attribute. It's primarily for balancing, so you don't have to think about this, but if you want an explanation, I will cover what all these numbers mean at the end of the video. For now, all you need to know is that Vortex damage is considered the same as its contaminated attribute. This means Physical Vortex counts as assault damage, Ice Vortex counts as shatter, etc. Another detail is that when you trigger Fire, Electric, and Ether Vortexes, the game will only display one damage number. Instead of multiple damage ticks over 10 seconds, all the burn, shock, and corruption damage is being triggered instantly. The total damage is going to get added to the Vortex bonus damage for one big number. This is just like Disorder. For Shatter and Assault, they will showcase 2 numbers when you trigger Vortex. These anomalies already trigger all their damage in one instance, so Vortex's bonus damage will be displayed as a separate value. This does matter because any Shatter or Assault buffs are going to affect both values, but any Vortex-specific damage buffs will only affect the Ice or Physical Vortex portion. With the Wind Anomaly covered, we can move on to Velina's core mechanic. When Velina triggers Vortex, she gains 1 Windbite point and summons a Condensed Cyclone. Velina can store up to 2 Windbite at a time, and this effect has a 3-second cooldown. Velina has 2 separate resources on her unique interface. Windbite is represented by the 2 yellow dots on the right side. As for the Condensed Cyclone, it deals wind damage and inflicts wind anomaly buildup on foes within. Just to be clear, Vortex does not create these Cyclones on its own. The Cyclones are an ability triggered by Velina. Continuing, when Velina has 2 Windbite points, the next time she triggers Vortex, she will consume those 2 points to first, increase that Vortex's damage multiplier by plus 150%. Second, instead of the Condensed Cyclone, Velina summons a stronger Sweeping Cyclone. Basically, the first 2 Vortexes will create 2 Condensed Cyclones. Every third Vortex, Velina will buff its damage multiplier slightly and create a larger Sweeping Cyclone. Besides just being bigger, when Sweeping Cyclone hits a contaminated foe, it will match their contaminated attribute and change color. Sweeping Cyclone reduces the foe's Wind Anomaly and the contaminated anomaly's build-up resistance by 7% for 35 seconds. So basically, Sweeping Cyclone debuffs the foe so it's easier to inflict anomalies on them. I want to clarify that despite changing color, I do not believe the Sweeping Cyclone inflicts anomaly buildup of the contaminated attribute. It only lowers buildup resistance. What Sweeping Cyclone does do is inflict a ton of Wind Anomaly. It lasts for 5 seconds, and unlike the Condensed Cyclone, it's able to trigger Windswept from off-field. That is an excellent ability for an Anomaly agent. Next, when Cyclones dissipate, they trigger a Windbloom if foes are in the Windswept state. For Condensed Cyclones, this Windbloom has a set damage multiplier of 145%. For Sweeping Cyclone, it's a damage multiplier of 255%. Besides setting up Windswept and Vortex, every Cyclone Velina spawns will trigger in a bloom when it ends. Assuming she can upkeep Windswept on the foe every 30 seconds, Velina should always trigger her Wind Blooms. For some extra info, when a foe is in the Sweeping Cyclone is defeated, its duration is extended by 5 seconds. This can occur one time per activation. In addition, there can only be one Sweeping Cyclone on the field at a time. This implies Velina can summon multiple Cyclones. We'll showcase how this is possible in just a bit. Velina still has more to her core passive, but let's review what we learned so far. When Velina helps trigger Vortex, she gains 1 Windbite point and summons a Condensed Cyclone that inflicts Wind Anomaly. With 2 Windbite points, the next Vortex is going to get its damage multiplier buffed, and Velina summons a larger Sweeping Cyclone. The Sweeping Cyclone is able to match the attribute of a contaminated foe. This allows Velina to reduce the foe's anomaly build-up resistance for easier anomaly triggers. When Velina's Cyclones end, they will trigger a Blooms if the foe is in the Windswept state. Thanks to its longer duration, Velina only needs to apply Windswept every 30 seconds. During that time, you want to trigger non-wind anomalies as many times as possible. This will trigger Vortex instead of Disorder. The more Vortexes you trigger, the more Cyclones get spawned, and this means more Bloom procs from Velina. In addition, the Cyclones are inflicting Wind Anomaly. The Sweeping Cyclone can even trigger Windswept from off-field, so it's possible for Velina to never have to step onto the field herself. With that being said, Velina's other unique resource, designated by the left side gauge, is called Windbloom. Velina enters battle with 45 Windbloom points and can have a max of 135. Velina gains 45 Windbloom when she uses her energy-consuming EX specials. So first off, these are some weird numbers. 45 times 3 though is 135, which explains the max value. Velina will only gain Windbloom in chunks of 45 points, so she fills up the gauge 1/3 at a time. Velina has 2 EX specials that cost 45 energy, which I guess explains the numbers for Windbloom. The first EX special is called Purifying Rise. Velina does a backwards dodge, then fires a wind projectile. She can trigger Vital View during the dodge part for some style points. Now if you have 90 energy, Velina can tap special a second time to trigger Triple Death Blow. This second EX special does more damage, daze, and anomaly buildup. To be more efficient with our energy, you ideally want to wait till Velina stores 90 energy, then use both EX specials. Velina's energy bar will update to showcase the 90 energy cutoff, that way you don't have to eyeball it. If we do our 2 EX specials, Velina will have 90 Windbloom. With 90 Windbloom, you can hold basic attack to unleash EX special Eye of the Storm. This move summons a Sweeping Cyclone on demand and triggers a backwards quick assist. Eye of the Storm is Velina's way to add more Sweeping Cyclones besides waiting for her allies to trigger Vortex. This is also why her core passive rewards budding energy regen. More energy equals more EX specials, which in turn becomes more Sweeping Cyclones. Now, something you should know is that starting Eye of the Storm locks you into its full animation. You cannot swap or perfect assist out, so do be aware. For those of you who don't like pressing multiple buttons, Velina has you covered. If you have enough energy, you can just hold special, and Velina will do all 3 of her EX specials in a row. Purifying Rise plus Triple Death Blow grants 90 Windbloom, which is enough for the Eye of the Storm. If Velina already has 45 Windbloom, she will only cast 1 EX special to get to 90 Windbloom, and then start Eye of the Storm immediately. For general gameplay, waiting for Velina to store 90 energy, then holding special will pretty much be job well done. There may be situations where you want more control though, so that's where the tap special method or hold basic inputs can be better. I'll discuss this later. Velina's additional ability requires an anomaly agent or a wind agent. I guess that means until we get a second wind agent, you're locked into double anomaly teams. So first off, the Sweeping Cyclones effects are buffed in 3 ways. The anomaly buildup resistance reduction is doubled from 7% to 14%. The Cyclone's daze is increased by 30%. Last, the Cyclone's own wind anomaly buildup is increased by 15%. If you want an even better Sweeping Cyclone, don't miss out on the additional ability. For more additional ability effects, Velina's Windswept and Vortex damage is increased by 10%. Very nice. When Velina's ultimate hits a Windswept foe, it will trigger a Windbloom with a set 680% damage multiplier. We might as well just cover Velina's ultimate and the rest of her main moves. Normally, the ult is a big chunk of Wind Anomaly buildup, and Velina triggers a backwards quick assist, so you can start working on your next Vortex. Assuming the foe has Windswept, Velina will also trigger the Bloom if you have her additional ability. Velina's Chain Attack is a solid Anomaly building move, nothing really fancy about it. Velina's basic attack string is also pretty simple. It's a 5-part combo with a longer 5th basic animation. The 5th basic will come with 40% damage reduction. This is because it does not have iframes. At least Velina warps behind the enemy, and you can cancel the animation with a dodge if you want. Now after both of Velina's regular EX specials, she can shortcut into this 5th basic attack. This can grant some extra energy or anomaly buildup, but again, it's not totally safe, so you might want to be careful. Velina has a couple ways to start a battle. In sheer defense, you can simply hold special to use one EX special, then start Eye of the Storm to spawn a sweeping Cyclone. Small mobs have 0 chance against this thing, and if you kill any enemy within the Cyclone, it's gonna last for another 5 seconds, which can catch the next wave of enemies. For Deadly Assault, Velina would just be short of an EX special. While you can basic attack then hold special for sweeping Cyclone, I like to set up with my support and second Anomaly agent. While they buff up and build Anomaly, you can wait for an attack to be perfect assisted. Velina has the regular defensive assist, but Anomaly agents typically have good build up on their assist follow-up attacks. With this follow-up, plus 1 EX special plus a sweeping Cyclone, typically that's going to be enough to trigger Windswept from off-field. For the rest of the battle, Velina is mainly just waiting to build energy for EX specials. If you wait for 90 energy, you can do the 2 EX specials into Eye of the Storm combo. All you need to do is hold special, then quick assist out after. Since the ultimate triggers in a bloom, you can save it for a stun phase. It does have a long animation, but I think it's a nice way to lead into a stun. You can try to get the enemy to around like 95 days or so, and then just let it rip. Now Velina's stun phases are interesting because unlike normal disorder teams, you kinda want the second Anomaly agent to be triggering Vortex as much as possible. It doesn't hurt to use Velina's Chain Attack to trigger Windswept because it still deals good damage, but you could also use double chain attacks to help your second Anomaly agent get more build up. This can be really useful on some agents like Jane, who refreshes her Passion State on any chain attack. If you want Velina to be a little more active for stun phases, you can use Eye of the Storm to spawn a Sweeping Cyclone. Similar to the ultimate, you can use it to lead into a stun phase. Sweeping Cyclones can help trigger Windswept, and it does need 5 seconds before it triggers a Bloom. You want to use it earlier so it dissipates during the stun phase. If the enemy has a really long stun phase, you can also insert Eye of the Storm in between your double chain attacks. This will require the manual chain attack setting. Let's say you get the stun normally, send in your second ally. Cancel the second prompt and swap to Velina. Assuming you have enough energy, you can hold special to cast 1 or 2 EX specials into Eye of the Storm. That's going to spawn the Sweeping Cyclone and trigger your second chain attack. This is fine, but it does take a while. If you're able to prep ahead, save 90 Windbloom. When Velina swaps in, use the hold basic attack input to start Eye of the Storm. This takes a lot less time. Before we move on, I do want to talk about a few things regarding Wind Anomaly and Vortex. First, I want to reiterate that Vortex damage is considered the same as its contaminated attribute. For example, this does mean Jane can cause Vortex to crit because it's treated as assault damage. Another example is that any damage buffs for specific anomalies will affect their Vortex counterparts. Since Grace buffs shock damage, this is applied to her electric vortexes. To continue this principle, Vortex damage is affected by anomaly duration increases. Rena, Bernice, and Arya add 3 seconds to shock, burn, and corruption. I'll go over the damage formulas at the end of the video, but basically Vortex takes into account the higher potential damage you would have gotten. This is just like Disorder. This is also going to apply to Jane's longer flinch state and Premier's longer frostbite states. Now for agents with a bloom, you should be aware that since the Windswept state is never removed, you're going to be only dealing Wind a bloom damage. This can be a boon when facing wind weak foes, which I assume we're going to see a lot during Season 3. Now for some negatives to think about, anything that requires an Anomaly agent's active state will just not function because Windswept's never removed. For example, Rena grants her team 10% electric damage if any foe is shocked. That will never be active after you apply Windswept. The same is going to apply for things like the Thunder Metal Drive Disc set. Another negative is that anyone relying on disorders is at a disadvantage. For example, Alice gains 30 Blade Etiquette off any disorder. Her Polarity assaults will still cause Vortex, but Alice is not going to get extra Blade Etiquette. Polarity disorders do still work, but they take a major hit. Since there is no proper wind disorder, they added a very small bonus for triggering polarity disorders just to calculate the damage. Now, the last major example I want to talk about is Miyabi. Miyabi gains Shimitsuki stacks off disorders, which is a major part of her gameplay. Without that effect, Miyabi basically has to rely on her own skills and triggering Shatter to get points. In general, some agents benefit from Vortex more than others, and some may lose effects since Windswept is never removed. Even though someone like Miyabi isn't really meant to work with the Wind Anomaly due to the lack of disorders, you can still use her. Vortex only cares about how fast you can fill your Anomaly gauge. This is extra true with Velina since she creates more Cyclones. If you do not have one of the off-field Anomaly DPSs, then Velina will be very good to have. She's probably going to be the main Wind Anomaly enabler for the rest of the year. For the build section, Velina will want Anomaly Proficiency, Attack, and Anomaly Mastery like any Anomaly agent. She will get Anomaly Mastery from her core passive, but it's going to require her to build Initial Energy Regen. To get the max 35% damage buff and 84 Anomaly Mastery, Velina will need an S-rank 60% Energy Regen W engine, a 60% ER main stat disc in Partition 6, and a 20% ER 2-piece set. This gets her to 2.88 initial ER. If you decide to run an A-rank Energy Regen W engine, Velina can still hit 2.76 initial ER, very respectable. If you forgo an Energy Regen in W engine entirely, Velina can only hit 2.16 initial ER. This grants 20% bonus damage and 48 AM. Not great, not terrible, but Velina is still plenty usable at this energy threshold. Velina's signature W engine is Joyudore. It has a 60% ER main stat and grants 60 AP in battle. When using EX Special, Velina increases Vortex and Windswept damage by 7% for 40 seconds, up to 2 times. If you have both stacks, the entire team will get a 60% AP buff. Joyudore's 14% bonus damage will stack with Velina's 10% from her additional ability. Velina's on-field time will consist of using 2 EX Specials, so this buff should be always active. On top of buffing Vortexes, Joyudore gives allies 60 AP, leans nicely into the off-field sub-DPS role. For other S-ranks, Velina can use non-Anomaly 60% ER main stat W engines. If you stick with Anomaly W engines, you can use any that grant more attack, AP, or Anomaly Mastery / build-up rate. Since Velina has 3 EX Specials, if you include Eye of the Storm, you could use Fusion Compiler. However, its extra AP buff will probably only affect the one sweeping Cyclone you spawn right after. For A-rank W engines, we finally have a new option. Boisterous Echoes will be from the Mock Exam Comeback Plan event in version 3.0. It has a 75 AP main stat, and triggering Vortex grants 3.2 energy once every 10 seconds. If you attack foes with an active anomaly, you deal 18.4% bonus damage. These values are with max overclocks. So basically, Boisterous Echoes is tailored for Velina, however, is the bonus energy enough to compete with the other A-rank options? Boisterous Echoes' bonus damage functions just like Electro Lip Gloss, but it trades the attack buff for energy. Rainforest Gourmet can grant a huge attack buff for a short duration. Then you have Weeping Gemini's monstrous AP buff. Personally, I think Velina's okay without extra energy, so good old Weeping Gemini is fine to keep using. If you're not comfortable with the amount of energy gained, then Boisterous Echoes is fine. That being said, you could also run a non-Anomaly Energy Regen W engine. I would use one of the gotcha options like the Vault, Kaboom the Cannon, or Anton Strohrig since these have higher base attack than the craftables. Any 50% ER W engine is going to grant an extra 12% damage and 30 Anomaly Mastery thanks to the core passive. Even if you were to trigger Boisterous Echo's extra energy every 10 seconds on the dot, the extra 50% initial energy regen will still grant slightly more energy. Now thankfully, Velina's drive disc selections are much simpler. For main stats, she wants Anomaly Proficiency on Partition 4, Wind Damage % Attack or Pen Ratio Partition 5, and then Energy Regen Partition 6. We want to go full Energy Regen for the core passive, so Velina should use Energy Regen 2-piece set. Moonlight Lullaby or Swing Jazz is fine. In version 3.0, Velina gets a Wind Anomaly drive disc set called Wuthering Salon. The 2-piece grants 10% wind damage. The 4-piece states, when using an EX Special, grant 25 AP up to 2 times for 40 seconds. If you trigger Windswept, your damage dealt increases by 18% for 40 seconds. Now Velina can cast her 2 EX Specials or 1 EX Special plus Eye of the Storm to get the 50 AP. She should reapply Windswept every 30 seconds anyway, so altogether, she can get 28% wind damage. Now if you don't want to farm for it, you can use a triple 2-piece setup. You could technically run Moonlight Lullaby and Swing Jazz, or just any of the Anomaly Proficiency or percent attack 2-piece sets. For teams, Velina is very much an off-field Anomaly DPS, so she could be quite nice if you don't have Bernice or Vivian. Windswept and Vortex create a different playstyle for Anomaly teams, but you still want to run double Anomaly agents. Since Velina has a backwards quick assist, generally you're going to want to place her after your other Anomaly agent. So let's just get it out of the way first. Velina can lower Anomaly build-up resistance for any attribute via her Sweeping Cyclone. Yuzuha can inflict any Anomaly type with her Sugar Burst Sparkles. Velina wants allies to trigger Vortex as much as possible, and Yuzuha was already the premier Anomaly support, so yeah, this duo will be the go-to for everyone. Now you can pretty much use almost anyone for your second Anomaly agent. Jane's a fun pick because she can cause Vortex to crit, and Yuzuha is physical, so she adds even more build-up naturally. The same is going to apply for Alice and Piper. Alice may prefer Disorders, but she can work if you want. Piper's our go-to A-rank Anomaly agent. She has a higher rate up on Velina's initial banner, so for brand new players, I would suggest building Piper if you have no other Anomaly agents. The only other non-limited S-rank Anomaly agent is Grace, who is electric. Also electric is Yanagi, whose play Disorders still deals some damage since they use part of her AP for scaling. Now, for the Shock Squad, you unfortunately cannot use Thunder Metal. Rena also won't grant her extra electric damage, but she does extend Shock by 3 seconds and enables Pen Ratio builds. Still waiting on her rework one day. Focusing on Premia and Arya, these two primarily deal their damage with Blooms. As we mentioned, these are going to become Blooms, so that could be good for win-weak enemies. If you remember from earlier, Vortex has different damage multipliers for each attribute. Because Shatter is the weakest anomaly, they made Ice Vortex a lot stronger to compensate. If you were worried about that for Premia, then it's all good. Premia also buffs Velina's Bloom damage, so these two are going to be a very good duo. For supports, any team attack buffers will do. Zhao works with Anomaly teams while Suna can feed Arya extra Bloom triggers. Astra's buff timers may be easier to manage since Velina doesn't need to swap in too much. Lucy's going to be our A-rank team attack buffer. Another A-rank support is Nicole. She would require more swapping, but Nicole's 40% defense shred is always a great add-on. For more Anomaly agent picks, Bernice is typically an off-foot agent herself, but she can take the on-foot spot thanks to her flamethrowers. We talked about how Miyabi relies on Disorders, but she's not completely unusable with Velina. As for Nangong, Velina will not get her additional ability. Regardless, Nangong's such a crazy agent that she can make it work, especially if you also want to throw in Yuzuha into the mix. Why not just use all the premier options, right? On that note, a potential storm is approaching that could shake up the Anomaly team comps. Straight from Hoyoverse themselves, they recommend Velina to partner with Remiel. As of this video, we don't know anything about Remiel's class type, nor her, I assume, unique Void Hunter attribute. Velina's additional ability does work with Wind agents, so a special Wind attribute wouldn't surprise me for the Void Hunter with wings. However, everything Velina enables is for Anomaly agents. Now, if you're excited for Remiel, then another reason to get Velina. At least they're giving us a heads up. Let's briefly go over Velina's Mindscapes next. For M1, Sweeping Cyclone's days bonus from the addition ability is increased by 20%. There should be 50% extra days total. Velina's Vortexes and Windswept damage from the squad is going to ignore 20% of the foe's attribute resistance. So M1 grants extra days and will boost the damage of your team's Vortexes plus Windswept triggers. For M2, Velina gains 1 Windbite when triggering Windswept. After Sweeping Cyclone gets contaminated, it will now accumulate Anomaly buildup of that attribute. Last, the additional ability's Vortex and Windswept damage buff is increased by 15%. Velina's M2 is quite frankly pretty insane. More Sweeping Cyclones via Windbite, and she now buffs Vortex and Windswept damage by 25% total. With M2, the Sweeping Cyclones now actually will apply Anomaly of any type instead of just reducing the build-up resistance. This makes Velina even more like Yuzuha. M4 is going to be very simple. Using EX Special will grant 15% attack for 40 seconds. More damage is always good. For Mindscapes 6, when Velina consumes 2 Windbite, she now refunds 1 Windbite point. Velina's Anomaly buildup versus Windswept foes is increased by 20%. Last, if Velina reapplies Windswept, the damage of the new Windswept is buffed based on the time remaining of the previous Windswept. M6 makes it so Velina spawns Sweeping Cyclone every other Vortex trigger, which is crazy good. It buffs her own Anomaly buildup, and that's because the next Windswept gets a higher damage buff the faster you reapply it. Ironically, this is kind of like Disorder. If Velina can reapply Windswept with 16 seconds remaining on the previous one, she's going to get that max 40% damage buff. Velina has some very tempting investment options. Her signature will max out her core passive while also buffing Vortex damage and giving the team an AP buff. M1 also buffs Vortex damage via Resistance Shred, plus you get faster stun opportunities. Mindscape 2 is really strong. Extra anomaly buildup for the contaminated attribute means more vortexes, which M2 further buffs. Yeah, that's a pretty insane grab if you're really looking to go all out for the new Vortex heavy playstyle. For the after party tips section, let's finish off the rest of Velina's moves and then we'll talk about Vortex damage numbers. Velina's dash attack does not lunge very far and it changes to the second basic attack, which also doesn't move much. The third basic after at least will block onto foes a bit better. Velina's regular special is a decently big Cyclone. You can use it as a quick heavy attack if needed. Velina's dodge counter is a nice move with some decent iframes, but it too only changes to the second basic. Velina's quick assist is the same animation as the dodge counter. You generally won't quick assist in too much unless you're playing like Astra. Now, in terms of AoE and grouping, Velina's sweeping Cyclones has got to be the best in the game, right? This thing is a monster against small mobs, and guess what? It even moves if you somehow move out of the AoE. I did discover that it seems like you need to be actively fighting to make the Cyclone track down a target. Now against multiple elite enemies, Velina will not gain 2 Windbite if you trigger Vortex at the same time. There is a 3-second cooldown on this effect. 3 seconds isn't that long though, so if you stagger your Vortex triggers, you actually can use the 2 enemies to get Windbite at a faster rate for Velina. Alright, to end the video, let's go over the damage formula for Vortex. Vortex uses a very similar formula to Disorder, so let's compare. When you trigger Disorder, all attributes will get a 450% attack anomaly damage bonus. To calculate the rest of the Disorder damage, you need to account for the remaining time left on the first anomaly. This is the highlighted color for Burn, Shock, and Corruption. Time is going to be equal to 10 seconds by default, so it's the highest potential burn damage is 1000 attack. Shock and Corruption are 1250% attack. Disorder will only account for the remaining damage left and add its 450% attack bonus. Now, Shatter and Assault deal all their damage in one instance at the start, which is 500% attack and 713% respectively. Their disorders still get a bonus for time remaining on their Frostbite and Flint states, but it's a very tiny bonus. To calculate Vortex damage, you'll notice the right side of the formula is exactly the same as Disorder. What has changed is that the bonus damage multiplier for each attribute. Shatter jumped to a massive 1300% attack, while Shock and Corruption only went up to 650%. The easiest explanation for these differences is basically for balancing. When you trigger Fire, Electric, or Ether Vortex, there is no time remaining because your burns, shocks, and corruptions are going to be dealing their full damage. Time is now going to be 10 seconds guaranteed. With that in mind, you add the Vortex bonus damage with the original Burn, Shock, and Corruption damage numbers, you're going to end up with a 1900% attack Vortex damage total. Burn was a weaker anomaly, so its Fire Vortex got a higher bonus. For Shatter and Assault, technically it's not correct to add all these numbers up because Shatter and Assault are separate damage instances. They're not going to get Velina's 10% Vortex damage buff, for example. I'm only adding them up for the sake of discussion. Shatter and Assault will still get their 7.5% attack bonuses like with Disorder, so with the set time of 10 seconds, you add an extra 75%. We can see that Ice Vortex is so far ahead of the others to make up for Shatter dealing the least damage on its own. At 1875%, it is only 25% attack behind Burn, Shock, and Corruption. As for Assault, 1588% attack. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. It's possible they're accounting for Yuzuha being physical or that Jane can cause Vortex to crit. However, Alice will be inflicting extra Polarity Assault Vortexes, and Piper actually has really good build-up on her EX special spins. I don't know if those are the reasons, but yeah, technically Physical Vortex does less damage. If you're able to trigger more Assaults and Vortexes overall though, then you're going to make up the difference. Here's some extra bonus info. Miyabi's Frost Vortex has no bonus Vortex damage because Frost Disorders have a super high scaling. 75% attack for 20 seconds alone means Miyabi's Frost Vortex deals 1500% attack. Again, it's not technically correct to add it to Shatter's 500% attack, but visually you can see how we get to 2000% attack total to align with the other Vortex values. The true downside is that Miyabi really wants Disorder triggers for her Shimotsuki stacks. She wouldn't get none of those with the Wind Anomaly. Now since there are no wind disorders, how do we calculate Polarity disorders on windswept foes? There is a 100% attack damage multiplier specifically for this, and yes, that is awful. The only reason Yunagi's Polarity disorders aren't completely terrible is thanks to her separate AP scaling that gets added on top. Meanwhile, poor Nangong does not get this. Her Polarity disorders, even with the stun damage bonus, is just super sad. Alright, enough with the fancy numbers. Velina and the Wind Anomaly will introduce a brand new way to play Anomaly teams. She would generally work with almost all older Anomaly agents, but anyone who likes disorders probably will stick with the original disorder team comps. Velina is going to probably be a mainstay for the next year because Wind is the shiny new attribute. As an off-field Anomaly DPS, Velina will give even more field time to your second Anomaly agent because you don't need to constantly juggle disorder. If that's something you struggled with, then the Vortex playstyle may be more up your alley. For newer players, the more Anomaly agents you have, the more Anomaly teams you can create. We don't know what the next dedicated Wind Anomaly agent is going to appear, so Velina is going to be very valuable until that happens. That'll be it for this video. Have fun with Velina in Season 3 of Zenless Zone Zero. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.